Refuting the Jesus is a copycat deity claim. Christianity under attack. Today, there are many claims by atheists that Jesus never existed, that Jesus is a copycat deity, that the Bible is a fairy tale book, that the Bible has no credibility to it. This documentary will prove with archaeological evidence that the Holy Bible is accurate and trustworthy with all it states. Archaeological evidence will show exactly where the tomb of Jesus is and where it has been preserved for over 2,000 years. Archaeological evidence will prove that Jesus was absolutely unique in human history, and Bible prophecy will show that there is a conspiracy by the rulers of this world to crown their Antichrist in a new world order, one world government, and to silence all Christians. There is a serious war being raged on Christianity today.
You know what? America has become a wicked nation, and our government sent $8,000 to a radio station in order to pay them to persecute me. That's what happened, friend.
The wicked want God's word to be silenced. They've always been about burning Bibles, making Christianity illegal, making soul winning illegal, and just trying to stop the truth from being heard, because if the truth is heard, it will bear fruit. God's word is not going to return void, and so it's going to have an effect. But because of the internet, they can't really effectively silence me, because even though I'm banned from these countries physically, my preaching is still permeating through YouTube and other social media. But of course, they're trying to censor us on social media as well.
YouTube removed a lot of our sermons and content from our YouTube channel. And then there was an 8-month period where we were just getting strike after strike. And we felt that that was trying to censor us and not allowing us to be able to use our platform or to be able to get the preaching and the truth out to our subscribers.
Whenever you censor something, you are limiting the person's access to the information, whether it be in print or speech or video or fill in the blank, and you're doing that with a purpose.
Censorship is a very controversial topic because in the United States we have the freedom of religion and the freedom of press, and so hypothetically, according to our Constitution, we should have the ability and the privilege to be able to say anything that we want. As we continue to approach what feels like a new world order or the end of the world with the coming Antichrist, we see that there's a lot of censorship of God's word.
There has been a push to remove the Bible, to remove Scripture, to remove the Ten Commandments, and ultimately general basic Christian morality from all areas of public life.
Hail, comrades! Hail, sisters and brothers, and hail, Satan! We are gathered here to celebrate the spirit of humanity in the dawn of a new American era. In a season when many commemorate the birth of Christ, we commemorate our own Genesis, the enlightenment of all humanity, a revelation of our nature as written in the annals of history, a gift from Lucifer, the light bringer, the morning star, and the rebel. We are Satanists. We engender moral, spiritual, and sexual freedom, personal independence, and insist upon personal choice in all things. We care for the significance of the individual spirit and personal moral responsibility. If you stand here today and embrace your nature, are free-thinking, self-governed, and godless, you too are a Satanist in the eyes of many in your own community, including those who represent you in your governments, including those who represent you in your governments.
The Church of Satan championed Satanism as freedom, but a former high-level Church of Satan member who called herself Rebecca in the following interview clip revealed otherwise.
You saw many very ugly things, like animals get sacrificed, even humans, and other really terrible things. Did it ever occur to you that this was evil?
No, because I was so brainwashed at the time, because when I was 4 years old, I was raped and molested by a high priest, and I knew nothing else of all that stuff, and I was just brainwashed with the Satanism and knowing that Satan was God and God was not real. Satan was God for me. And I thought, yeah, I was so numb to it, really.
How did you view Christians back then?
I hated them because they had no power. Like, I heard so many times that, you know, God was real and Jesus was so true. But I didn't see the power working throughout the church. In fact, I saw Satanists working also in the church, and Satanists tithe more than Christians do.
The goal of Satanism is as follows.
What is the primary goal or purpose of Satanism?
Yeah, their purpose is to rule the world.
What was your purpose?
My purpose was to get all the power that I could and to get as high up as I could.
You have explained to us that there was human sacrifice that went on inside of the Satanic Church and inside of Satanic ritual. Can you tell us how this was done?
How did they murder people? All the children's posters that you see that are missing, they're pretty much dead. They have underground caverns in the mountains, and they keep the children and the kids and the women and men there. And then at a certain time in mid-September, October, they take them out, and they're so... Remember when I told you I could make people get away from me? Like, they'd make the people so numb with curses and stuff, and they'd also drug them up. And they'd take a sacrificial knife and they'd start from the chest and move all the way down to your abdomen. And then that's how they sacrificed, and they'd collect the blood and they'd drink it. When the mid-September through mid-November, they sacrifice babies, and nothing but babies, because they need the pure blood of the untainted children. And I was really, I didn't understand what it was like. I just can't believe I'm seeing this every year of my life. I've experienced that, and that was the hardest part for me, is like hearing those babies literally scream and cry, and then seeing their blood flow.
Rebecca, where did they get the babies?
Yeah, they have mothers that are expecting, that they hold in the church, and they also have people that they kidnap, and they impregnate them through whatever, and they get babies from everywhere.
Why is it that no one knows this?
Because there's Satanists in the police force and also in the government, the army. They're everywhere. They're even on the council of, yeah, the representatives of the United States also. And they're silenced because this is not being exposed, because they don't want it to be exposed.
Rebecca, what happens to the people that want to come out of Satanism?
They get killed. They get followed. They get taken. They get sacrificed in front of the congregation of the Satanic Church.
Why?
Because they know too much information about the Satanists and who their names and places of where they keep the people underground, and they just know too much information. It's like being in a gang or in a mafia. You don't get out alive without consequences.
Is this difficult for you to talk about?
It's really difficult because, yeah, I feel really scared because I don't know how to tell everybody that's out there that I came out, because I'm not sure if anybody's going to believe this, because it's so much like a fantasy. Yeah, warfare is real. We're born into a war. And yeah, you'd be very foolish not to understand that, because demons are real.
Unbeknown to the majority of asleep Americans, satanic cult members flood the U.S. government, the media, the military-industrial complex, science, and education, to say the least. And as the satanic New Age continues to rise, they wish to bury the truth of God's Word and eventually outlaw Christianity altogether. In fact, the war against Christians has already begun. Not only are they doing their best to silence Christians, but the Illuminati international bankers, led by the Synagogue of Satan House of Rothschild, has created the Department of Homeland Security, which has labeled Christians domestic terrorists, and has also trained law enforcement to view Christians in the same way.
Folks, we've got a very serious situation here. I'm holding what is called the right-wing extremism, current economic and political climate, fueling resurgence and radicalization and recruitment. And in it, we talked about the fact that they define pro-lifers as domestic terrorists. They put this in a Department of Homeland Security document, this official assessment, now saying pro-lifers, people that believe in end-time prophecies, people that are opposed to the administration's position on immigration, those of us that are standing up for the sanctity of life and for the sanctity of marriage, all of those are now potential, and this is what they're saying, domestic terrorists.
You are wicked people, and you know what? You can hide behind that badge and think that you're a public servant. You're a servant of the devil, is what you are.
Our American children have been the victims of an educational system that has been purposely rigged to cram out atheists. A dumbing down of the American population has taken place.
Speck. You are a small speck on a big universe, and that's where we know the creator of this big universe. His name is Jesus Christ.
Oh, fuck you, man.
Yes.
Are you an atheist?
Yes.
Yes, I am.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Are you an atheist?
I am. Yeah, I'm an atheist.
Yes, I am.
Alex, do you believe in God's existence?
No, I do not.
How long have you been an atheist?
I would say probably since I was about 15 years old.
So you don't believe in the existence of God?
No, not really.
What happened when you were 15?
I started questioning things, and I really just started to think about the logic behind everything.
For the most part, we are not shown the evidence for there being a higher power. If we were, I almost guarantee that almost every atheist would immediately agree to there being a higher power.
Are you atheists?
Yes.
Why?
Well, I just haven't seen enough evidence, I suppose. I grew up in a Christian family, and just over the few years during high school and as I grew up, I just realized that there wasn't a lot of evidence to support that belief system.
The reason American students are not taught archaeological or historical facts about the Holy Bible is because the truth is hidden from them by design, as is the evidence for God's existence. Before we get into the evidence, let's address the Jesus was a copycat deity claim that atheists love to make.
Did you know that resurrecting gods are very common, especially among all the cultures that gathered in Rome around the time of Jesus?
Those who encounter this claim online or elsewhere may start to wonder about the truth of the New Testament. Is the account of Jesus Christ simply a retelling of dying and rising pagan gods? If Jesus' life is similar to other pagan gods, does that mean that Jesus is also a myth? This argument implies that if gods we consider myth claim the same things that Christianity claims, that Christianity must also be false. This guilt by association mindset attempts to discredit the accounts of the Gospels by suggesting that life events attributed to Jesus are recycled bits of storytelling that are popular across different cultures and time periods. So what is a believer to think in the face of such assertions? There are two important questions that a believer should ask when tackling the Jesus myth allegations. 1. Are these alleged parallels to pagan gods historically accurate? And 2. If they were, what difference would it make? Are there really a number of gods who have biographies shockingly similar to that of Jesus of Nazareth? Names that are commonly included in this group of so-called similar gods include Mithras, Dionysus, and Osiris, among others. This claim is one version of this attack on the deity of Christ that is continually circulating online. Some claim that other gods share the attributes of being virgin born, being born on December 25th, which is not in the Bible, by the way, performing the same kinds of miracles Jesus did, dying, in some cases being crucified, and miraculously resurrecting from the dead. Let's examine several of the pagan gods that Christianity is alleged to have plagiarized, as well as 3 of these shared life events: a virgin birth, death, and resurrection. The claims of atheists and the uninformed.
There's been many religions before Christianity.
Yes.
And they all had the same story as Jesus. There was the son of God, what's his name, was Kronos it started with a K. Yeah, and it was way before Jesus was born.
Okay.
And he died 3 days later, resurrected.
Mm-hmm.
And he was born on December 25th. And I was just telling my friend, I was like, okay, what's your point? And he was like, bro, like all this stuff happened way before Jesus.
Now the truth about Mithras.
And what I would say to somebody who said that Mithras was someone who predated Jesus, and therefore you're saying that what, Jesus borrowed, the New Testament writers borrowed from it, and they invented it? Here's the truth about Mithras. Number one, it's too late to influence Christianity because it's after Christianity. It's not before. If anybody took anything from anybody, it was Mithras taking it from Christianity, not the other way around. Secondly, he was born out of a rock, not a virgin. Thirdly, he was said to be a god, not a teacher. He didn't have 12 disciples. Number 4, he didn't sacrifice himself. He sacrificed a bull. And finally, we don't know anything about his death. There was no resurrection. So just because some website somewhere says all this stuff doesn't mean it's true.
Mithras, unless you consider emerging fully grown out of a rock being born of a virgin, this god already has one strike against being similar to Jesus. Certainly he must have been crucified, right? No. Actually, Mithras didn't even die. He was believed to be taken to paradise on a chariot when still alive. Since he didn't die, he didn't resurrect from the dead. 3 strikes, you're out. Dionysus, also known as Bacchus. Dionysus doesn't fare much better. He was said to be conceived out of an affair between Zeus and a mortal woman, Semele. After Zeus's wife Hera found out, she tricked the mortal into demanding that Zeus reveal himself in all his glory. He reluctantly agreed, knowing that this would kill her. He was, however, able to rescue Dionysus and sewed him, or his heart, into his thigh until he was born. This is the claim for Dionysus' rebirth, a far cry from the death and bodily resurrection of Jesus Christ. Osiris. There is no birth story recorded in regards to Osiris. He was eventually killed by his own brother, torn into 14 pieces, and spread around Egypt. His sister and wife, Isis, gathered and buried almost all of the pieces of Osiris. Osiris became the ruler of the underworld as the god of the dead. Some versions of the life of Horus say that Osiris was magically reassembled by Isis and impregnated her before becoming ruler of the underworld. Even if this version is to be preferred, it is worth noting that, unlike Jesus, Osiris would have been brought back to life by another rather than by his own power. And a reassembling is not the same as a resurrection. This is Peter Joseph, a filmmaker who wrote, directed, and produced the film Zeitgeist, which attacks the deity of Christ. Joseph has no credentials in religious doctrine, he has no credentials as a historian, and he has no credentials in archaeology. Besides Zeitgeist, other works by Peter Joseph include the music video God is Dead for the satanic English rock band Black Sabbath. A Black Sabbath is a witch's Sabbath. You won't find Joseph working for any Christians, but you certainly find him working for Satanists and those who push out satanic messages. Peter Joseph has openly expressed his hatred for Christians, which is very revealing to his agendas. The following is but one among hundreds of false claims that he makes throughout his propaganda film, Zeitgeist.
Horus was crucified. Horus was crucified. Horus was crucified.
Sorry, Peter Joseph, but the mythical Horus could have never been crucified, for crucifixion was a Roman practice carried out thousands of years after Horus's death. There is nothing in recorded history that documents that crucifixion was ever an Egyptian practice. Crucifixion was a Roman method of execution put into practice thousands of years after the mythical Horus died. They may as well say that Horus was killed in a motorcycle crash. This is how mistaken Peter Joseph's film Zeitgeist is. He couldn't be any more wrong. Rather than being crucified, most versions of the Horus myth do not have a death recorded at all. In some instances, it was believed that he merged with the sun god Ra, and each sunrise is a symbol of him being reborn each day. Again, this is hardly similar to the resurrection of Jesus, which happened one time in recorded history. Fortunately, a proper defense of Jesus' unique claims to deity does not hinge solely on an examination of these other pagan gods. Let's pretend that one or more of the previously mentioned gods really did share the same biography as Jesus, particularly in the areas of their birth, death, and resurrection. Would this disprove the gospel accounts of Christ? The short answer is no, it wouldn't. Here's why. We determine the historical accuracy of an event or person based on evidence, not on uniqueness. We do not demand that the details be completely unique in order to consider them to be true. Take this example as shared by Greg Kukel of Stand to Reason. Did you know there's a book that was written around the turn of the last century about a ship that was an unsinkable ship which hit an iceberg on its maiden voyage and sank? The name of the ship in this story is the Titan. This story is from the novel The Wreck of the Titan, or Futility, published in 1898. This is remarkable because 14 years later, in reality, a ship named the Titanic sunk on its maiden voyage after hitting an iceberg, just like the story in the book. Now, what if you had read the novel The Wreck of the Titan, published in 1898, and then later heard that a ship called the Titanic had actually sunk in 1912? I'm sure you can see that rejecting the story of the Titanic on its face would be foolish, only because you'd read a novel similar to the actual event. Whether or not the Titanic sank is determined by the evidence for its sinking. unrelated to any other fictional stories that were like it. Likewise, the existence of Jesus is determined by the historical documented record and is not rejected because of the claimed fictional stories that atheists and Satanists state to be similar to it. Even if a historical event shares characteristics of a mythological one, the reality of what happened is not diminished. The truth of an event is determined by the evidence for or against it, not in the absence of or of similar fictional claims. Was the biblical account of Moses' birth copied from Sargon of Akkad? First of all, there is in existence a myth about a certain Assyrian named Sargon. This legend, at first glance, bears some resemblance not to the life of Moses more broadly, but to the story of his birth. In other words, there are no parallels whatsoever between the mythical legend of Sargon and the life of Moses, such as his leaving Pharaoh's palace, his going into the desert, etc. However, the stories of the birth accounts are similar. The legend of Sargon's childhood, how he was placed in a basket and sent down a river, comes from two 7th century BC cuneiform tablets from the library of the Assyrian king Ashurbanipal, who reigned from 668 to 627 BC, written hundreds of years after the book of Exodus. If someone wants to argue that one account was borrowed from another, it would have to be the other way around. The Sargon legend appears to have borrowed from the Exodus account of Moses, which is much older. Was the biblical story of Adam and Eve bringing evil and death into the world copied from Pandora's box? Pandora's box was written by the Greek poet Hesiod. Most biblical scholars believe the book of Genesis was the first book to be written down. This would have happened around 1450 BC to 1400 BC. That's 700 years before Pandora's box was written in 700 BC. So we can see that it was Pandora's box that copied the Genesis account. So if anyone copied anyone, it was Hesiod, the Greek pagan poet, that clearly copied the Genesis account. Once again, we see the pagans stealing from the Hebrew Israelites and spinning the truth into their own pagan version. James Dickerson stated to me, "Send me one, just one archaeological dig that proves that any story in the Bible is a matter of historical fact." Okay, the following is from the university textbook Western Civilization, Volume 1, page 33. Quote, "The most famous project carried out by King Solomon was the building of the Temple of Jerusalem, in which the Israelites placed the Ark of the Covenant, a holy chest containing the sacred relics of the Hebrew faith. The Ark was also considered the throne of the invisible God on earth." This representation of the Ark, believed to be one of the earliest, is from a 2nd century AD synagogue at Capernaum. Here we see a university textbook, Western Civilization, Volume 1, confirm the biblical account of the Ark of the Covenant's existence as historical fact. Its representation of the Ark was found in a 2nd century Jewish synagogue and confirms its existence. The evidence supporting the Holy Bible is an accurate record of history is amazing.
Yet in the last 100 years, more than 25,000 archaeological digs have unearthed evidence validating the Bible as an accurate record of history. Yet in the last 100 years, more than 25,000 archaeological digs have unearthed evidence validating the Bible as an accurate record of history.
Disinformation agent Jordan Maxwell, real name Russell J. Pine, attempts to compare the ancient sun worship to Christianity, and William Cooper rebukes him on his radio show. Many atheists and disinformation agents try to make the claim that Christianity is nothing but a copy of the ancient sun worship. Here's Jordan Maxwell, Russell J. Pine, talking about the ancient sun worship religion, as he is clearly comparing it with Christianity.
Okay,
And if you understand also that in that cold and fearful world, when the sun went down, there was a lot of fear for your life. There were a lot of predatory animals. And so the coming of the sun the next morning was always something to look forward to, that brought warmth, that brought light, and brought security. And around that concept grew a whole religio-political philosophy of the coming of the sun, God's sun, the light of the world. And it has been used by the ancient Egyptians, all the mystery schools, and of course you probably know it was referred to as Baal worship at one time. Baal was the sun, God's sun, the light of the world. And, the whole concept in the ancient world was that he had 12 helpers, which were the 12 signs of the zodiac, or the 12 months of the year. And of course, and he died, of course, with the crown of thorns, like the Statue of Liberty has the crown of thorns. It's the corona, or the sun rays. And when we begin to see all of these connections, and of course, in the spring of the year, the sun which had died in winter had passed over from the death of winter into the new life of spring. So in the old Semitic world, they celebrated the Passover. And we even say that today when someone dies, they passed on, or they passed away, or they passed over. Right. And so we get the old symbolism out of Egypt of the sun dying in the winter and passing over to the new life in spring. And so in the beginning of spring, we had the Passover. Is an interesting thing, too, about the sun, is that the ancient world realized that on the December 22nd, which was the winter solstice, they noticed something interesting on the sundials. And of course, the sundials being round, they could each degree for each day. They noticed that on the 22nd, the sun did not move. On the 22nd, it stayed on the sundial on the same degree. On the 23rd, it stayed on the same degree. It didn't move any further south, and it didn't start back north. On the 24th, it was still in the same degree on the sundial. It didn't move. So they said, the ancient Egyptians said, anything that was moving and is now not moving is dead. So therefore they said God's son died and was in his tomb or dead for 3 days. Then on December 25th, anything that was dead and in his grave and not moving for 3 days and now begins to move back to the northern hemisphere, it moved its first degree. So on December 25th, they said God's son is born. On December 25th.
Now, in the real world, let's clarify something for a lot of people who are listening out there. You're not talking anything about Christmas. You're not talking about what Christians traditionally recognize as,
I'm getting
as the birth of Christ. You're getting into the symbolism of the ancient religion of the sun, which was later perverted in Christianity to reflect this in order to capture the pagan worshipers into the Christian church.
Absolutely, right. Now, what I'm saying is that
because December the 25th is not Christ's birthday.
No, not at all. No, it's the birthday of the sun.
Right.
Again, Maxwell is incorrect. December 25th is not the birthday of the sun, but rather the day the pagans claimed to be the birthday of the sun. The symbolism of the ancient religion of the sun was absorbed into Catholic Christianity in order to appeal to the pagans. This the Catholic Church did in Rome, and their version is Satan's counterfeit Christianity, filled with idol worship and sun worship symbolism. Put simply, the symbolism of the ancient religion of the sun was perverted into Catholic Christianity in order to make Rome's form of Christianity reflect the ancient religion of the sun. Catholic Christianity is against biblical Christianity, and their perverted Catholic version is what atheists use to make the false claim that Christianity originates in the sun worship of the ancient mystery religions. Real Christianity originates with the prophets of God and Jesus Christ himself. The Catholic Church incorporated the following mystery religion pagan practices into their Catholic religion. December 25th is the birthday of Tammuz and not Jesus. The first recorded date of Christmas being celebrated on December 25th was in 336 AD in Constantine's time. A few years later, December 25th was declared the birth of Jesus by Catholic Pope Julius I, even though historically it was not the birthday of Jesus Christ. The Catholic Church also incorporated goddess worship from the ancient mystery religions, as the ancient pagan worship of Isis was brought into the Catholic Church as the worship of Mary. They blasphemed one of the 10 Commandments, "Thou shalt have no other gods before me," Exodus 23, and turned the mother of Jesus into a false god, as the Bible condemns the worship of anyone except God, God the Father, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit. What are the ancient mystery religions?
The title of the book is The Bloodlines of the Illuminati. What exactly is the Illuminati?
The Illuminati is the continuation of the mystery religions. There was quite a number of mystery religions in antiquity, and these mystery religions had councils that controlled them, and then there was a supreme council that operated clear from India to the British Isles that then coordinated all of these mystery religions, and that would be today what we call the hierarchy of the Illuminati.
So the Illuminati is basically just an extension of the mystery religion system, the whole type of philosophy.
Yes, it was a way of hoarding knowledge and power to a few special people.
Let's just say that there are other ancient gods whom have biographies similar to Jesus, as atheists falsely claim. Well, this would simply be Satan's attack on the Godhead, which Satan has seen God, and Satan uses his knowledge of God and the message written in the stars by God to corrupt the truth in order to deceive humanity from the truth of God. The Bible states, "And God said, Let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs, and for seasons, and for days, and years." Satan/Lucifer and the fallen angels perverted the Creator's gospel message that was written in the stars and turned that message into sun god worship religions, as they attempted to astrologically allegorize the message of God that would eventually be written down into letters by the Old Testament prophets of God and the New Testament disciples of Christ. The ancient sun god religion also included idol worship, which the Catholic Church also incorporated from the ancient pagan sun god worshipping mystery religions. The Catholic Church also incorporated a Sunday Sabbath into the Roman Catholic religion. The sun god was worshipped on Sunday, and under Constantine the Sabbath, which was originally held on Saturday, began to be held on Sunday for the sun god rather than for the biblical God. Now, I'm not saying that Christians worship the sun god. I'm saying the Sabbath was originally held on the 7th day of the week, which is Saturday. Christians obviously worship Jesus Christ. The sun symbolism and all-seeing eyes on and inside Catholic churches are symbolisms of the ancient mystery religions whom worship the sun god, which is another name for Satan. The satanic Babylonian trinity was King Nimrod, the sun, Semiramis, the queen of heaven, and Tammuz, the reincarnated Nimrod. The satanic trinity in Egypt is a copy of this, is Osiris, Isis, and Horus. See, Satan, whom is familiar with the Godhead, created his own version of it. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Romans 1:20. So as you can see, Satan, who was a fallen angel who had access to the throne of God, knows all about the Godhead that is made up of God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit. 3 persons, 1 God. Here's another verse that talks about the Godhead Trinity. "And God said, Let us make man in our image, after our likeness." Now man was not made in the image of angels, and angels are not made in the image of God. This is Jesus talking to God the Father and God the Holy Ghost / Spirit about making man in God's image, which Satan/Lucifer hates. Scientists such as Richard Dawkins have stated many false claims about Jesus' existence.
Reading your book, The God Delusion, you say that it's under scholarly dispute among historians that Jesus actually existed. Now, I checked with the ancient historians. That is not so. And it disturbed me. History is not natural science. But what I don't understand is this, why you would write something like that.
I don't think it's a very important question whether Jesus existed. There are some historians, most historians think he did, some
They
historians
certainly
don't.
do. I couldn't find an ancient historian that didn't.
Well, there are one or two, but I don't really care, actually, because precisely because it's petty.
Let God be true, but every man a liar. Romans 3:4. Now Richard Dawkins takes back his false claim about Jesus.
When you look at history, and let's leave aside, maybe I alluded to the possibility that some historians think Jesus never existed. I take that back. Jesus existed.
Atheists love to say Jesus never existed. Well, let's examine what the ancient historians said about Jesus Christ.
Every once in a while, some people will propose that Jesus never existed. It lasts for a little while and then it goes away. That Jesus did exist is very well attested in the historical literature. It is mentioned by a number of non-Christian sources. For example, Jesus is mentioned by Josephus. Tacitus mentions Jesus. Lucian of Samosata mentions him. Marabar Serapion mentions Jesus. The Talmud mentions him. Jesus has, according to the Gospels, a number of brothers. It's very difficult to have brothers of someone who didn't exist. Josephus mentions the martyrdom of James, the brother of Jesus, who was called the Christ. Again, it's very difficult to have someone who's a brother of someone who did not exist. You have the Apostle Paul, who was out persecuting Christians within just almost immediately after Jesus' crucifixion. And why would he persecute the followers of a movement of someone who had never existed, and that this person is supposedly had existed within just a couple of years within when Paul's persecuting Jesus? So the historical evidence we have is quite strong that Jesus existed. In addition, we have a number of Christian sources who mention Jesus. We have multiple independent sources with the Gospels. You have Paul, the letters of Paul. You have the book of Hebrews. You have other New Testament literature. These are multiple independent sources, and although they're a Christian, you just can't discount them because they're Christian. It would be rare to find a professional historian or biblical scholar who would propose that Jesus never existed.
When atheists ask for evidence for the existence of Christ in history, the person asking the question wants outside of the Bible sources, which will be given here. However, the Word of God itself is an important source for the evidence of Jesus' existence in history. For example, Jesus prophesied in 30 A.D. that the second Jewish temple would be destroyed, where there would be not one stone left upon another, Matthew 24:2. In 70 A.D., 40 years after Jesus' death and resurrection, we saw the fulfillment of this prophecy by Roman General Titus. Roman General Titus led the Roman assault against Jerusalem in 70 A.D., and the second Jewish temple was destroyed this same year, with not one stone left upon another, exactly as Jesus Christ had prophesied. The Bible has prophecy that was given by God to the prophets of God and written down into the books of the Bible. Likewise, the prophecy of a one-world currency that will be inserted in our hands and foreheads has arrived. Revelation 13, 16, 18. You know this is the microchip. And soon, a one-world government, Revelation 13, 7, with a one-world ruler, the beast, also known as the Antichrist, will arrive. The global elite refer to the coming one world government as the New World Order. Also, the prophecy found in Daniel 12:4 that people would be going to and fro, back and forth, we see today with the advent of modern forms of transportation, cars, trains, planes, space shuttles, etc. Also, the prophecy that knowledge would increase, also found in Daniel 12:4, we see today with the advent of the internet as knowledge has truly increased. The vast majority of scholars, Christian and non-Christian, will grant that the epistles of Paul were in fact written by Paul in the middle of the 1st century AD, less than 40 years after Jesus' death. In terms of ancient manuscript evidence, this is extraordinary strong proof of the existence of a man named Jesus in Israel in the early 1st century AD. It is also important to recognize that in 70 AD the Romans invaded and destroyed Jerusalem and most of Israel, slaughtering its inhabitants. Entire cities were literally burned to the ground. We should not be surprised then if much evidence of Jesus' existence was destroyed. Many of the eyewitnesses of Jesus would have been killed. These facts likely limited the amount of surviving eyewitness testimony of Jesus' existence. Considering that Jesus' ministry was largely confined to a relatively unimportant area in a small corner of the Roman Empire, a surprising amount of information about Jesus can be drawn from secular, that is, non-biblical, historical sources. Some of the more important historical evidences of the existence of Jesus include the following. The 1st century Roman Tacitus, who is considered one of the more accurate historians of the ancient world, mentioned superstitious Christians from Christus, which is Latin for Christ, who suffered under Pontius Pilate during the reign of Tiberius. Suetonius, chief secretary to Emperor Hadrian, wrote that there was a man named Christus, or Christ, who lived during the 1st century. Source: Annals 1544. Flavius Josephus is the most famous Jewish historian. In his Antiquities, he refers to James, quote, the brother of Jesus, who was called Christ, end quote. There is a controversial verse in Antiquities 18:3 that says, quote, now there was about this time Jesus, a wise man, if it be lawful to call him a man, for he was one who wrought surprising feats. Josephus continues, he was the Christ. He appeared to them alive again the 3rd day, as the divine prophets had foretold these and 10,000 other things concerning him, end quote. One version reads, quote, at this time there was a wise man named Jesus. His conduct was good, and he was known to be virtuous, and many people from among the Jews and the other nations became his disciples. Josephus continues, Pilate condemned him to be crucified and to die. But those who became his disciples did not abandon his discipleship. They reported that he had appeared to them 3 days after his crucifixion, and that he was alive. Accordingly, he was perhaps the Messiah, concerning whom the prophets have recounted wonders. Julius Africanus quotes the historian Thallus in a discussion of the darkness which followed the crucifixion of Christ. Source: Extant Writings 18. Philly the Younger, in Letters 1096, recorded early Christian worship practices, including the fact that Christians worshiped Jesus as God and were very ethical, and he includes a reference to the love feast and the Lord's Supper. The Babylonian Talmud, Sanhedrin 43a, confirms Jesus' crucifixion on the eve of Passover and the accusations against Christ of practicing sorcery and encouraging Jewish apostasy. See, the Jews hated Jesus, and in their Babylonian Talmud they curse Jesus and state that he's burning in hell in excrement. Why would they waste their time having so much hatred for a man that atheists like to claim never existed? Lucian of Samosata was a 2nd century Greek writer who admits that Jesus was worshipped by Christians, introduced new teachings, and was crucified for them. He said that Jesus' teachings included the brotherhood of believers, the importance of conversion, and the importance of denying other gods. Christians lived according to Jesus' laws. They believed themselves to be immortal, and were characterized by contempt for death, voluntary self-devotion, and renunciation of material goods. Marabar Serapion confirms that Jesus was thought to be a wise and virtuous man, was considered by many to be the king of Israel, was put to death by the Jews, and lived on in the teachings of his followers. Then we have all the agnostic writings, non-Christian sources, which are the Gospel of Truth, the Apocryphon of John, the Gospel of Thomas, the treatise on resurrection, etc., that all mention Jesus' existence. And again, these are non-Christian sources. In fact, we can almost reconstruct the gospel just from early non-Christian sources. Jesus was called the Christ. Josephus did magic, led Israel into new teachings, and was hanged on Passover for them. Babylonian Talmud in Judea. Tacitus, but claimed to be God and would return. Eliezer, which his followers believed, worshiping him as God. Philly the Younger. Does the age of the earth disprove the Bible? Is the earth really 4.5 billion years old?
Now you say, well, Pastor Anderson, what about all the evidence, the carbon dating, the radioactive isotopes? What about the fossils? Well, here's how that works. When God created this earth, and it isn't complicated to understand, when God created this earth, He created it as a mature earth. When for example, when He created man and put him in the Garden of Eden, He didn't put a baby there. So when Adam was 5 days old, he didn't look like a 5-day-old. He looked like a 30-year-old man. So if a scientist or a doctor would have examined him and we asked him, how old in your understanding do you think this man is? He would have said, oh, this man's probably about 30 years old. Wrong. He's 5 days old. Think about it. If you would have come to him when he's 3 years old, he's going to look like he's 33, right? Because he's created as an adult. And in fact, when God created the plants, He didn't put seeds in the ground. He created full-grown plants. Which came first? The chicken, not the egg. He created a full-blown, chickens and put them in the Garden of Eden. So all of these creatures, all the plants, they were created mature. Now stop and think about this. Do you think that when God created this earth, everything was just completely smooth, like there were no mountains, no rivers, no valleys, no caves? Do you think He just made the earth just completely smooth? Well, we know that He didn't because of the fact that in order to separate the dry land from the water, parts of the surface had to be higher and parts had to be lower so that the oceans would go down into those lower parts that the dry land might appear. So, when the geologist looks at mountains and rocks and says, oh, this would take millions of years, or God just put a mountain there that looks like it's been there for millions of years, just like a man that looks like he's been there for 30 years, just like if you would have cut down the trees in the Garden of Eden and counted the rings and said, oh, this is a 300-year-old tree. No, it's 300 minutes old. Do you see what I'm saying? So God created a mature earth. You know, some stalactite or stalagmite, you could look at it and say, oh, this is how long it would take to form. Or God just created stalactites and stalagmites already existing. Okay, so that's one point. And then the second point is that God sent a catastrophic global flood on this earth that also wreaked great havoc and created all kinds of fossils and created all kinds of canyons and shifting of the plate tectonics that made a lot of the geographic features that we see happen quickly. And there are so many places that you can go, even just in Arizona, where even the evolutionist, God-rejecting, Bible-rejecting guides of the tour groups and museum docents will tell you, like, this is a mystery to us. We don't know how this petrified forest happened. We don't know how this Grand Canyon happened. We don't know this about this meteor crater and that. You know, there are a lot of things that they can't explain. But when you go down to ASU here and get in the science department, boy, they have all the answers down there. I mean, they know everything, what happened. So you can't gauge the history of the earth and get the year through science. Why? Because science can't account for the fact that it was already created mature. in the first place. And science disregards the clear evidence of a global flood. Even though the evidence for it is everywhere, they don't want to hear that.
Does the Big Bang disprove the Holy Bible? The Big Bang Theory was actually created by a Kabbalist occultist. Rabbi Isaac Luria, who is said to be the greatest Kabbalist in world history, anticipated concept for concept the theory of the Big Bang origin of the universe in his Kabbalist doctrine Shattering of the Vessels. Thus the cosmology of a 16th century Jewish Kabbalist was validated by being staged and passed off as science 400 years later. The Kabbalah is Jewish mysticism, i.e., the occult. Quote, the Kabbalah teaches magic, or the art of intercourse with the spirits and supernatural beings. One cannot be a convinced Kabbalist without soon becoming a magician and devoting oneself to the practices of occultism. End quote. Quote, the Kabbalah is occult science itself. It is the secret theology of the initiates, theology essentially satanic. In a word, the counter-theology. Our God, the God of the Christians, is the power of evil in the eyes of the Kabbalists, and for them the power of good, the real God, is Lucifer. Occult Theocracy, page 26. It was George Lemaitre, a Catholic Jesuit priest, who proposed the Big Bang in 1927. Lemaitre was also a Kabbalist. The Big Bang term was actually coined by Fred Hoyle, an astronomer and cosmologist whom rejected the idea of a Big Bang origin of the universe, along with numerous other scientists. See, science is rigged, staged, very well controlled, and science is in fact censored.
It's happening. We are losing our freedom in one of the most important sectors of society, science. I have always assumed that scientists were free to ask any question, to pursue any line of inquiry without fear of reprisal. But recently, I've been alarmed to discover that this is not the case. It all began when I met evolutionary biologist Richard Sternberg in Washington, D.C. His life was nearly ruined when he strayed from the party line while serving as editor of a scientific journal affiliated with the prestigious Smithsonian Museum of Natural History. Your office was over there?
That's correct. This here is the West Wing. Directly ahead of us is the West Wing of the Natural History Museum.
So now you're not there anymore because you're a bad boy.
No, I'm not. No, I was exiled.
You're a bad boy. You question the powers that be. What was Dr. Sternberg's crime? He dared to publish an article by Dr. Stephen Meyer, one of the leading lights of the intelligent design movement. The paper ignited a firestorm of controversy merely because it suggested intelligent design might be able to explain how life began. As a result, Dr. Sternberg lost his office, his political and religious beliefs were investigated, and he was pressured to resign.
The questioning of Darwinism was a bridge too far for many. The mentioning of intelligent design that occurs at the end of the paper was over the top. And I think the intelligent design proponents have raised a number of very important questions.
And you wanted to get those questions brought up and discussed.
Placed on the table.
Placed on the table.
People were so upset about it. They were so upset that you could see they had a physical emotional reaction.
Wow.
They were saying that Stephen C. Meyer is a well-known Christian, that Stephen C. Meyer is an intelligent design proponent, that Stephen C. Meyer is a Republican. It was all couched in terms of religion, politics, and sociology. The way the chair of the department put it is that I was viewed as an intellectual terrorist.
Terrorist?
Because of giving the topic of intelligent design some modicum of credibility.
What happened to Dr. Sternberg was terrible.
Science is rigged to uphold the Darwinian worldview. Scientific evidence for the existence of God, intelligent design, has been purposely suppressed by science, which is simply man's knowledge, man's rigged knowledge.
After Dr. Caroline Crocker simply mentioned intelligent design in her cell biology class at George Mason University, her promising academic career came to an abrupt end.
My supervisor invited me into his office. He said, "I'm going to have to discipline you for teaching creationism." And I said, "I mentioned intelligent design on a couple of slides, but I did not teach creationism." He said, "Nonetheless, you have to be disciplined." At the end of the semester, I lost my job.
Not only did this well-loved professor lose her job at George Mason, she suddenly found herself blacklisted, unable to find a job anywhere.
So whenever I interviewed for a job, I would be offered it, usually on the spot. Since this has happened, and since people can Google my name, I'm finding that when I send my credentials, I do get interviews. I get many interviews, but I never get offered a job. I don't tell them about my science sin. I was only trying to teach what the university stands for, which is academic freedom.
There's nothing to be learned in neurosurgery by assuming an accidental origin for the parts of the brain that we work on.
It wasn't just biologists who were feeling the Darwinist wrath. When neurosurgeon Michael Egnor wrote an essay to high school students saying doctors didn't need to study evolution in order to practice medicine, the Darwinists were quick to try and exterminate this new threat.
A lot of people on a lot of blogs called me unprintable names that were printed. There are a lot of very, very nasty comments. Other people suggested that people call the university I work at and suggested perhaps it's time for me to retire. I realized when I kind of went public with my doubts about the adequacy of Darwin's theory that I would encounter criticism. What has amazed me is the viciousness and the sort of baseness of it.
I'm an old guy. I have tenure. I'm academically safe. But the young people and what is happening to them in America right now because of this scientism gulag is really terrible.
Apparently, Professor Marks was not as safe as he thought. A few months after this interview, Baylor University shut down his research website and forced him to return grant money once they discovered a link between his work and intelligent design.
In order to attract grants, you have to market yourself. So you put up sites and call yourself labs and groups and things like that in order to get visibility. And in my entire experience in academia, I never went to any superior and asked them any permission to put up any of these labs. So the fact that this was singled out, let alone shut down, is jaw-dropping. It's astonishing. I have never been treated like this in my about 30 years in academia.
Shut up, you freak! I say shut up! It's a madhouse!
If you peel back the onion, I think that there is no doubt that the center of this is my work in what some would call intelligent design.
People really get emotional about this. Whenever you say intelligent design in a room of academics, them's fighting words.
Creationists. Astronomer Guillermo Gonzalez found himself in a fierce shootout with Iowa State University following the publication of his book, arguing that the universe is intelligently designed. Despite a stellar research record that has led to the discovery of several planets, his application for tenure was denied, putting his career in jeopardy.
I worried about my tenure a little bit in 2005 when the petition was being circulated because I viewed that as a strategy of Hector Avalos and his associates to try to poison the atmosphere on campus against me because he knew I wasn't tenured yet and I was very vulnerable. I have little doubt that I would have tenure now if I hadn't done any professional work on intelligent design.
Dr. Gonzalez had this advice for scientists who might be thinking about following his example.
If they value their careers, they should keep quiet about their intelligent design views.
Science has been controlled and steered for a very long time now to ignore evidence for intelligent design, i.e. God, and those scientists whom have been honest about evidence for intelligent design have been demoted or fired. This continues today.
It's the kind of thing where you just learn to keep your mouth shut.
In addition to those scientists who were willing to appear on camera, we encountered many more who didn't dare show their face for fear of losing their jobs.
You use an intelligent design perspective to get the research done, but you're not allowed to talk about it in public.
And so there is definitely incentive, if you think about it, for people to remain within the mainstream.
You know, what's he up to? What is he thinking? Is he one of them? That kind of thing.
If I write intelligent design, they hear creationism. They hear religious right. They hear theocracy.
So it appears Mr. Shermer, the self-styled skeptic, was wrong on this one. Intelligent design was being suppressed in a systematic and ruthless fashion.
Science will say what its controllers want it to say, and science is controlled by the Illuminati, aristocratic, elite families.
And when we see an elite, and it is an elite that controls essentially all the research money in science, saying there is no such thing as moral truth, science will not be related to religion. I mean, it's essentially official policy of the National Academy of Science that religion and science will not be related. I mean, hey, you know, that cuts off a lot of debate, doesn't it?
What's going to happen if this doesn't change?
Well, I think we're watching it happen, aren't we?
Roger Morneau was a secret society member, and this secret society was made up of aristocratic elite families. Morneau was told by the secret society high priest that evolution was in reality a satanic deception that was pushed upon the masses.
And the priest went on saying that the plan of Satan to deceive the human family this way, he says is the most intriguing thing to his mind. And he went on saying how it was going to be brought about. He said that a fellow by the name of Darwin and another fellow by the name of Thomas Henry Huxley would be used by the spirits because in their childhood they had been hypnotized by medical doctors, and they figured that they would be real good subjects to lead the people into this belief that they had, that Satan wanted to bring into people's lives. That's right.
The third point was what?
Was to destroy the Bible without burning it.
Okay.
See?
And what was his strategy on that?
On that, it was very interesting, because after the Great General Council, it was decided that Satan would tutor Charles Darwin personally in setting up the principles of his theories of evolution. He was tutored by Lucifer himself, fallen Lucifer. Now, he made a unique statement. He said that according to the spirits, anyone that teaches a theory of evolution is considered to be a minister of the great religious system. See, they call it the religious system, the theory of evolution, because it is a system of schooling people and getting them to disqualify themselves and being members of Christ's kingdom. And he said that every teacher of that theory is recognized by the spirits as a person of great value and receives a very special unction from Satan himself, giving great power to induce spiritual blindness, to convince and convert. 3 capacities are given to those teachers of the theory. Then, that's not all. The priest says that Satan considers the teachers of the theory of evolution to be so valuable to him that in the sight of all the inhabitants of the galaxies, he assigns a retinue of bright, beautiful angels to follow that educator all the remainder of his life. And that in the sight of the inhabitants of the galaxies is the greatest honor that he can bestow upon his workers on mankind and to, until the controversy is finished.
Before we get into the archaeological evidence for Jesus' birth and the Holy Bible, we will look at Bible end-time prophecy and the coming satanic New World Order.
For the first time in history, we have seen a movement, a political and social movement that is truly global in nature. So it's not just a new order, it's a new world order, and in that sense it's quite accurate, because this is new in history.
When we emerge from this war, we will be the only superpower on earth. No nation since the Roman Empire will have been so dominant in the world as we will be on the day that this conflict ends.
If you look at the wars that we're in, 134 wars that we're involved in, that this country has made a decision to attempt to imperialize and deconstruct other countries, destabilize other countries, we can see that we're a country of war now. Why? It's called resources, it's called money, it's called greed, it's called all the things that they want to have that are not ours to have. And it appears to me that if there were anything that I could look at that would show that there is a new world order, is the entanglements that the United States military is involved in from a globalist view that is killing people, destroying countries with no conscience whatsoever.
I'm going to show you today how the Bible actually prophesies that one day there will be a one world government, a one world religion, and a one world financial system.
There is no doubt that Scripture warns of a new world order. There is no doubt about that.
Now, the Bible tells us to prove all things. So in order for me to get up here and make this kind of a claim that the Bible predicts that there's going to be this new world order, then I should be able to show you these things in the Bible. And the place where all three of these elements are found is right here in Revelation 13. So look down at your Bible, and first of all, in verse 7, I'm going to show you one world government in the Bible. In Revelation 13:7, speaking of the Antichrist, it says, "And it was given unto him to make war with the saints and to overcome them."
And power was given him over all kindreds. Now, kindreds is talking about the different families of the earth. You know, you've heard of someone being, your next of kin. And then he says, and tongues, which the word tongue is just talking about languages, and nations. So there we see a one world power, a one world government, where one man, one system is given power over all kindreds and tongues and nations. That is the Bible outlining for us the coming one world government.
Look down at verse number 8 and you'll see the one world religion. It says in verse 8, "And all that dwell upon the earth shall worship him." So we see all people in the earth. We see people who are living in India that today are Hindus, people who are living in the Middle East that today would be Islamic, people living in Western countries who call themselves Christians or Catholic or whatever they call themselves. We see people from all over the world, all nations, all languages, worshiping this man and proclaiming him to be basically God in the flesh. So we're already seeing it today, even before this happens, where religions are starting to merge in a sense and talk about putting aside their differences. If you jump down to verse 16, you'll see the one world financial system. Look at Revelation 13:16. "He causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell, save he that had the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. His number is 666. 666 is that number, the proverbial 666. And he says that no one on the planet of any nation, any tongue, any people, he says no man will be allowed to buy or sell without this mark. Well, that proves that the whole financial system is going to be united to be able to enforce that one rule for everybody. Nobody can buy or sell.
You can't buy without his permission, so there's a financial control of the world. One world currency
probably electronic. We already have paper dollars, which are worthless, except for the cost of the paper. Well, if it's electronic, now you even save the cost of the paper. You don't even have that. So there's going to be a political, a financial, and a religious control, a one-world control of everybody.
That is different than what we have today. That is a new world order. That is a one-world financial system. So all three of these elements are right here in Scripture. Yet there are people out there who, when you talk about the New World Order or things of this nature, they say, oh, you're a conspiracy theorist, or you're some kind of a nut, you're paranoid. But wait a minute, can you really be a Bible-believing Christian and just ignore Revelation 13 when it predicts that these exact things are going to come to pass?
And we are seeing it all come together rapidly now toward the fulfillment of this prophecy 2,000 years ago, headed for a one-world government, a one-world religion, a one-world currency. Satan's going to be the mastermind behind all of that.
Breaking tonight, 2 weeks into a Donald Trump presidency, and we are already seeing signs of a new world order.
This is a new world order that Trump has put in place because he's an advocate.
It's not just liberals who do that, John. It's not just liberals who do.
With Trump, I think you see the possibility, really for the first time ever, of a new world order that involves an even closer than before merger between the corporation and the state.
I'm going to bomb the out of them. It's true. I don't care. I don't care. They've got to be stopped.
Airstrikes. Bomb them. Bomb them. Keep bombing them. Bomb them again and again.
And that's right. I'd blow up the pipes. I'd blow up the I'd blow up every single inch. There would be nothing left. And you know what? You'll get Exxon to come in there in 2 months. You ever see these guys, how good they are, the great oil companies? They'll rebuild that sucker brand new. It'll be beautiful. And I'd ring it, and I'd take the oil.
Joe Biden, like Trump, is also an Illuminati puppet politician.
You, your class, has an incredible window of opportunity to lead in shaping a new world order for the 21st century.
Moving on. The New Testament has been preserved in more manuscripts than any other ancient work of literature in the history of the world, with over 5,800 complete or fragmented Greek manuscripts cataloged, 10,000 Latin manuscripts, and 9,300 manuscripts in various other ancient languages, including Syriac, Slavic, Gothic, Ethiopic, Coptic, and the Armenian language. The following is on how the Holy Bible has been preserved.
Isn't it the case that in antiquity, the way that the Bible was preserved was that there was only one copy of the Bible, and that copy faded over time, and then as it faded they would make another copy of it by copying it over, but just one copy at a time?
Not at all, not at all. The situation is completely different. What you do have in antiquity is, first of all, the church start spreading over the Roman Empire and other parts. So everywhere they need copies. So at the very beginning, what you need is copies of the New Testament, because...
So they made thousands of copies.
Of course.
Well, I understand, after having been here and visited, that there are literally thousands of manuscripts. People would go places and want to take their scriptures with them, so they would copy down from another manuscript, and whole bunches of people would do that. So there's literally thousands.
We have like 6,000 copies that go back to antiquity, that are either in Hebrew for the Old Testament or in Greek for the New Testament. If we are talking about the versions, the figure is much higher. We have 40,000 copies. So, which is something amazing. You don't have a single other book in antiquity where you have so many texts.
Is it possible that monks or scribes change things in the Bible, as many have suggested?
If that were to happen, over and over again that monks didn't like something, so they would take it out of the New Testament? With all that you have, with the different translations and all the fragments and all the copies that you have, would you be able to determine that that happened?
Impossible.
This is impossible because soon after the original writings of the New Testament, thousands of copies were made. So if a monk wanted to make a change, his change would stand out like a sore thumb. This is also true for the Old Testament.
So, being here in Israel, we can test our modern Bibles with what's been found in the Dead Sea Scrolls.
I met up with Dead Sea Scroll expert Dr. Randall Price, who is excavating at Qumran, where the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered. We can compare the Dead Sea Scrolls with our modern Bibles to see if any plain and precious portions are missing.
This is Cave 1. This is where the first discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls was made.
So the plain and precious things were missing, this is saying, after the 12 apostles and after the scriptures went to the Gentiles. What does the Dead Sea Scrolls say about that? Because that would predate that.
Yeah, obviously this is before Jesus' birth, before the birth of the church. They were hidden away, not discovered for 2,000 years after. So it gives us a chance to look at a history before any of this became controversy or any possible changes could have been introduced. And it tells us that the texts remain unchanged. There's nothing different between it and the translation from which our modern Bibles come. So there's nothing missing.
Are these plain and precious portions missing from the New Testament?
Look, when we are talking about the New Testament, we are talking about the best ever well-known book of antiquity. And the difference between what we know about the New Testament and any other book from antiquity is amazing.
The thousands upon thousands of ancient manuscripts and fragments of ancient biblical manuscripts can easily be compared to our modern Bibles, and one thing is clear. God has preserved His Word as He stated He would. So Mormons, Muslims, Catholics, atheists, etc. are not using accurate sources when they say the Bible is corrupt or that the original message was lost. For our modern Bibles can easily be compared to the numerous ancient manuscript copies that have been passed down for centuries. We can see it has been perfectly preserved. There is no other ancient manuscript proven as authentic as the Holy Bible. None even comes close.
When we compare all the ancient copies of the New Testament that we have, the differences are very small. So you cannot even show me a text where this has been done, because the difference between the different copies that we have are very, very, very tiny. They don't affect the substance of the meaning. It is like saying, instead of how can I put it, but saying however. It is this kind of small and tiny changes. You don't have changes that affect the substance of the meaning of the New Testament.
Biblical prophecy also proves the Bible is God's Word.
We can also test the prophets in the Bible. The central theme of the prophecies made by the Old Testament prophets is in the coming of a person, known as the Messiah, someone who would come to save and eventually rule the world. The writers of the New Testament believed that Jesus Christ was this Messiah. In the New Testament, the title Christ has the same meaning as the Old Testament title Messiah. The first biblical prophet we will test is Micah. Around 700 BC, Micah prophesied that the Messiah would be born in Bethlehem. But you, Bethlehem Ephrathah, though you are small among the clans of Judah, out of you will come for me one who will be ruler over Israel, whose origins are from of old, from ancient times. Amazingly, a fragment containing Micah's prophecy was discovered among the Dead Sea Scrolls. Dr. Price took me to the cave where it was found.
What we know is beneath this floor, there were 15,000 fragments that were uncovered.
This fragment containing Micah 5:2 dates to 100 BC, making it a century older than the birth of Jesus in Bethlehem. In Matthew's Gospel, he states that Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, and then he quotes Micah 5:2 to show that Jesus fulfills Micah's prophecy.
So there is a link between the prophecy of Micah and then in the New Testament it is said that he was born in Bethlehem and that he fulfills that prophecy.
I went to Bethlehem for Christmas, along with crowds of people from all over the world. This is the Church of the Nativity. It's built over the traditional place of Jesus' birth, a site that pilgrims have been visiting for almost 2,000 years. Jewish archaeologist Dr. Gabriel Barkai has been working in Israel for more than 40 years.
Listen, I'm very objective. First of all, I'm an archaeologist, and I'm not Christian.
Where personally do you believe that Jesus was born?
Under the Church of Nativity in Bethlehem, there are some caves. And those cavities were in use in the first century beyond any doubt. For very important places, very significant places in Christian faith, I would regard the traditional places as authentic.
Next, Greg and I tested the biblical prophet Isaiah. Around 700 BC, the Old Testament prophet Isaiah made several prophecies about the coming Messiah. One of the most significant was the prediction that the Messiah would come from the ancestry of King David. In love, a throne will be established. In faithfulness, a man will sit on it, one from the house of David. The oldest copy of this prophecy dates to 125 BC and is preserved in what's known as the Great Isaiah Scroll. It was time for Greg and I to make the climb up to cave number 1, where the Great Isaiah Scroll was discovered. But this is literally, right here, is where they found an entire scroll of Isaiah that dates to 125 BC. Wow. I got to see the actual Great Isaiah Scroll because it was on display to the public for 3 months last year for the 60th anniversary. They brought it out and displayed it. Isaiah says that the Messiah will come from the house of David. Do we know that the house of David is real?
So the house of David, which is first mentioned in the Bible, but is also mentioned extra-biblical sources, such as the Tel Dan inscription.
This is one of two inscriptions that have been found dating to the 9th century BC that specifically mention the historical House of David.
The House of David is the family out of which the Messiah is supposed to come.
So we have two ancient inscriptions that mention the House of David specifically?
Yes, both of them 9th century BC.
And then was Jesus from the House of David?
That is the tradition which we have in the New Testament.
Jesus, son of David. What does it mean? He's giving to Jesus a messianic title, son of David.
There is also additional evidence outside of the Bible that Jesus is from the ancestry of King David. Eusebius, an ancient source, reports what happened to the descendants of Jesus' brother Jude at the end of the 1st century AD. The descendants of Jude were related to Christ himself, and they were brought to the emperor, and he asked them if they were descendants of David, and they confessed that they were.
This fact is very telling for us because it shows that the family of Jesus was the family of the heirs of King David. So Jesus was the heir of King David. So when at the cross you have a title which is nailed under the cross or upon the cross, we don't know, where it was written, Jesus from Nazareth, King of the Jews, this has a very serious meaning. He is the son of David.
So there is both biblical and extra-biblical evidence that Jesus fulfills Isaiah's prophecy that the Messiah would come from the house of David. Then Greg and I went from a prophecy about King David to a prophecy that King David himself gave. King David's prophecies about the coming Messiah are in the book of Psalm, including one that predicts details about the Messiah's death. They have pierced my hands and my feet. A fragment containing this prophecy was found among the Dead Sea Scrolls.
We have found a fragment of that psalm beside the Dead Sea that reads or translates, "They have pierced my hands and my feet."
An obvious form of execution that pierced the hands and feet of the victim was Roman crucifixion. There is strong evidence that the Romans crucified their prisoners by nailing them hands and feet to crosses. Do we have any archaeological evidence that people were crucified by being nailed to crosses?
Yes, there was found a bone box in Ashuri, and inside it there were found the bones of one individual. He ended his life upon the cross. His heel bones were found with the nails still inside them. It proves beyond any doubt the practice of crucifixion.
There's also literary evidence outside of the Bible that people were nailed to crosses. The 1st century historian Josephus wrote as an eyewitness that the Roman soldiers amused themselves by nailing their prisoners in different postures, and so great was their number that space could not be found for the crosses, nor crosses for the bodies. Incredibly, Josephus also wrote about the crucifixion of Jesus. Now there was about this time Jesus, and Pilate had condemned him to the cross. I joined the crowds in the streets of Jerusalem on Good Friday as they commemorated the crucifixion of Jesus, an event that took place almost 2,000 years ago. In the New Testament, the eyewitnesses to Jesus' crucifixion wrote about the nail marks in his hands.
The Greek word that is that appears there is precisely nail. So Jesus was really nailed. And also you have in the book of Acts, it is clearly said, and the word that you have in Greek clearly says that Jesus was nailed. So you see, Jesus was nailed to the cross, and this fulfills that prophecy of Psalm 22, where it is said that they have pierced my hands and my feet.
David's prophecy that the Messiah would die by having his hands and feet pierced is preserved in a Dead Sea Scroll fragment that is over 100 years older than when Jesus was nailed to a cross through his hands and his feet. Next, Greg and I tested the biblical prophet Daniel. The Old Testament prophets not only give us detailed information about how the Messiah would die, but the prophet Daniel even predicts when. Daniel predicted that the Messiah will be cut off and have nothing, and the people of the prince who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. Cut off is an Old Testament term meaning killed. The city referred to here is Jerusalem, and its sanctuary is the temple. So in about 538 BC, Daniel predicted a significant sequence of events. He predicted first that the Messiah would be killed, and then the temple in Jerusalem destroyed. We know in history that from Daniel until today, the only time that the temple was destroyed was in 70 AD. So in order for Daniel's prophecy to be fulfilled, the Messiah would have to be killed before 70 AD. This is precisely when Jesus was crucified. After Jesus was crucified, is it true that Jerusalem and the temple were destroyed?
Crucifixion took place in Jerusalem around the year 33 of the Common Era. In the year 70 of the Common Era, the temple got burned down by the soldiers of Titus. Titus and his army, his engineering forces, intentionally ruined the entire city of Jerusalem, as well as the focal point of Jerusalem, that's the Temple Mount.
There's no question, right, that the writings of Daniel, including that particular prophecy, predate the 70 AD destruction?
That's for sure. That's for sure.
So the city of Jerusalem and the temple will be destroyed after the Messiah is cut off.
And that's what happened.
So just as Daniel predicted, Jesus was killed just before the temple and Jerusalem were destroyed. After his death, Jesus was taken down from the cross and laid in a tomb like this one. This tomb is 2,000 years old, dating back to the time of Jesus. Today, the tomb of Jesus is protected beneath this massive construction.
Well, buried beneath this mass of construction here is the tomb of Jesus.
There is a very, very ancient tradition about the location of the tomb and the place of crucifixion, which is in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre.
This is Dr. Shimon Gibson. He is a secular archaeologist who has personally excavated here in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre.
If I weigh up all this evidence that I have, the archaeological historical evidence, this has to be the tomb of Jesus. And it's nothing, I'm not swayed by any kind of sort of religious belief here. It's based on archaeological historical evidence. This has to be the tomb of Jesus.
Finally, I showed Greg another prophecy by King David. David not only prophesied about how the Messiah would die, but he goes on to predict that he would not stay in the grave, but would again know the path of life. You will not abandon me to the grave, nor will you let your Holy One see decay. You have made known to me the path of life. The disciples believed that Jesus was the fulfillment of David's prophecy. Because his body did not decay in the grave, he had risen from the dead. On the third day after Jesus' burial, some of his women followers found his tomb empty.
On the Sunday, following the execution which took place on the Friday, the women come to the tomb expecting to see the body of Jesus inside, and they find nothing. It's an empty tomb.
I talked with Dr. William Lane Craig, the author of the groundbreaking book, Assessing the New Testament Evidence for the Historicity of the Resurrection of Jesus.
We have very, very strong literary evidence for the empty tomb, namely the evidence found in the Gospels and the rest of the New Testament.
In the Gospels, an angel at the empty tomb tells the women, "He is not here, he is risen."
The original explanation that the disciples themselves, the eyewitnesses, gave was God raised Jesus from the dead. That was the message they proclaimed in Jerusalem and were willing to die for.
There is no doubt that the apostles saw Jesus' resurrection as a direct fulfillment of David's prophecy. In fact, the apostle Peter quotes David's prophecy in his sermon and preaches that David died and was buried, and his tomb is here to this day. But he was a prophet, and he spoke of the resurrection of the Christ, that he was not abandoned to the grave, nor did his body see decay. God has raised this Jesus to life, and we are all witnesses of the fact.
The contrast was very clear. Whereas David's tomb was there, identifiable, the tomb of Jesus was empty, his body was not to be found, God had raised him up. And so in the sermons of the Acts of the Apostles, we have independent evidence for the empty tomb of Jesus in these apostolic sermons.
But the literary evidence even goes beyond the New Testament. Again, the first century historian Josephus, even though he is not a follower of Jesus, still writes of his resurrection. Those that loved him at the first did not forsake him, for he appeared to them alive again the third day, as the divine prophets had foretold.
We have multiple independent early witnesses to the facts of Jesus' empty tomb, post-mortem appearances, and the origin of the disciples' belief in his resurrection. And it's on that basis that the majority of New Testament historians have come to believe that these are, in fact, historical pay dirt and belong to the portrait of the historical Jesus that we can reconstruct. When I weigh the historical evidence pertinent to the resurrection of Jesus and the various competing hypotheses to explain this evidence, then I'm convinced, objectively and honestly, that the best explanation of this evidence is the hypothesis that the original eyewitnesses gave, that God raised Jesus from the dead. And for that reason, I think that this was a historical event.
Even today, pilgrims return to the site of Jesus' tomb to celebrate his resurrection, just as they have been doing for almost 2,000 years. Once a year, pilgrims from all over the world pack into the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. A fire is then lit from within his tomb and is spread from candle to candle through the church, then throughout Jerusalem, and then to the ends of the earth. According to the New Testament, Jesus' resurrection clearly fulfilled David's prophecy. In this world, there are over 6 billion people alive today. But if you want to send a letter to just one person out of those 6 billion, how much information do you have to put on a letter to do that?
Not much. Surprisingly small amount.
A few lines of information on a letter can pinpoint one person in the world. In the same way, the details given to us by David, Isaiah, Micah, and Daniel can identify one person out of all the people that have ever lived. Who else in the scope of history was born in Bethlehem, from the house of David, pierced hands and feet, killed before the temple was destroyed, and whose tomb was found empty? This is God speaking to us. He really did tell us before he sent his son Jesus. He really did tell us what his plan was before it happened.
Bible readers have no reason to ever doubt God's Word.
Jesus also prophesied about the temple that stood in Jerusalem in his day. His disciples remarked about the massive stones and magnificent buildings that were on top of the Temple Mount. "Do you see all these great buildings?" replied Jesus. "Not one stone here will be left on another. Every one will be thrown down." Jesus is specifically predicting about the buildings, that they would be so thoroughly demolished that not one stone would remain on top of another. Not only this, but all these stones would be thrown down off the Temple Mount platform. Is there any archaeological evidence for the prophecy of Jesus and the destruction of the temple that there wouldn't be one stone on top of another?
This is the evidence. This is the evidence. Look at it. It speaks for itself. There is evidence in front of our eyes to the prophecy that came through.
Jesus talks about the stones being cast down, and what he's talking about is they would be cast down from the destruction of the buildings off of the platform onto the ground here.
Here you have it.
And when they were cast down and it struck this this road that we're sitting on, this street, what would have been the impact?
Just look at it. If you look at it, there are certain places like here and over there where there are depressions. This is from the pressure, enormous pressure of these gigantic stone blocks, each of them several tons in weight. Now the 9th of Av, or Tisha B'Av in Hebrew, is traditionally thought to be the date of the destruction of the temple, and on that day laments are said for the destruction of Jerusalem, and on the eve and the morning of that day they read the book of Lamentations. And you may see even people sitting and crying. This is an event which took place almost 2,000 years ago, and they still feel it as if it was yesterday. Looking at the stones, I can hear the voice of the sound of the stones collapsing and breaking the slabs of the street. I can hear the people around shouting. I can hear the hussing of the flames around. So with a little bit of imagination, those stones can become even more talkative than they are. Not a single building of Jerusalem was left, and not a stone upon a stone of the temple remained.
Jesus' prophecy that the Jewish temple in Jerusalem would be destroyed took place in history.
Jesus lived, made numerous prophecies which have come true, and Jesus is going to return again, as Jesus Christ cannot lie.
While Greg remains a member of the LDS Church, he made a commitment with me that he would thoroughly study these things out for himself. And I am convinced that anyone who is willing to do the same will fulfill the promise that Jesus made almost 2,000 years ago. Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free.